How many of you guys are familiar with the word woke? Have you heard it? Woke culture? Cancel culture? Have you heard it in social media? Are you familiar with these terms? Just this week, I heard something that made me think. This supposedly woke culture, that means awaken, by the way. That means they're aware of all the injustice that's going on. Doesn't like the fact that women are called mothers. They are now we have schools that are teaching this. Brace yourself on Mother's Day. Now they are told birthing persons. This is funny, but this is also sad. Marriage is under attack. Human sexuality is under attack. Motherhood is under attack. Now, you might agree, you might disagree, but we will see as the culture progresses, some of this stuff is going to go by the wayside, but some of it is going to stick, and it's going to affect you, your children, and or grandchildren. In the midst of all this potentially negative outcomes or circumstances or cultures, I wanted us to look at a story of two women, which is Sarah and Hagar. Hagar is a prophet. And focus specifically on Hagar because she was oppressed. She was mistreated. She was even abused. She wasn't there by her own choice. If you mothers today, ladies, girls, find yourself that you identify with these situations, afflicted, oppressed, felt like you're not seen, felt like you don't matter. You're only there for one sliver of your identity. This story is for you. This story will speak to you. Now, why do we say Scripture is alive? Because God has given us the Scriptures to read the story of these people and learn from them and to remember these truths. Okay? The truths we're going to see now happen to Hagar, but it applies to us too. It's given to us because we want to read and remember when we are confronted with a similar situation, we can remember what happened because God doesn't change. It's the same God that was the God of Hagar, and it's the same God today, and He will be forever. With that, let's jump right in. Now, Sarah, Abram's wife, now at this point, they're not Sarah and Abraham, they're Sarai and Abram, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maid named Hagar. Egyptian maid named Hagar she's a slave. Okay? It's not the maid that comes and makes the bed. She's a slave. She had no choice of where she was, who she worked for, and what she had to do. How did Abraham and Sarah ended up with her? They ended up with her when they went to escape a famine. They went to Egypt. Most likely, they picked her up there. Okay? And we're going to see Sarah, at this point in history, is not such a nice person. Now, she was barren. She couldn't have children. And God had promised a chapter before to Abraham, saying that, I'm going to give you zillions of children, grandchildren, and they're going to be a nation, and they're going to there's going to be thousands and hundreds of thousands, millions of them. He said, but Lord, I don't have even one child, let alone zillions and zillions. He said, I am going to give you a child. Since God had said that, it's been 10 years. He's waiting. His wife cannot get pregnant. She cannot have a child. So, what do? God said you're going to have a child. You can't have a child. It's been 10 years. What do? You take matters into your own hands. Is that ever a good idea? No. When God's promise is not delivered, you try to do it yourself. Let me tell you from experience, it's never a good idea. And we're going to see why. Now Sarah said, look, the Lord prevented me from having children. In a way, she's kind of blaming God. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. Now, during that time, this kind of surrogate parenthood, motherhood, was culturally and lawful. They have archaeological contracts that they dug out from the Assyrian kingdom that shows that during this time, when people got married, and if a wife did not produce a child within the first 2 years, she was to give her helper or whatever, to have a child. So this is an accepted norm. This is legal during the time. In other words, everybody was doing it. Does that make it right? Because everybody was doing it. Is that God's way? No. Because everybody is doing it doesn't mean on Mother's Day, let's do a classic cliche that mothers say. If everybody jumps off the George Washington Bridge, will you do the same? Right? No. So it applies here. And Abraham listened to the voice of his wife, just like Adam did. Now, listening to the voice of your wife is not a bad thing. But listening to the voice of your wife that is not giving you godly direction or advice is a bad thing. So as men, we have to know the difference. What's godly, what's scriptural, what's fleshly and worldly. Sarah right now is trying to do things in her own power, with her own abilities. I waited for God for 10 years. I don't have a child. Well, let's make it happen. Why wait for God? Anytime you don't wait for God's timing, you mess things up. What happened here? As you know, Hagar gets pregnant, has a child. We're going to go through all that. Oh my goodness, we might not have time. And that child's descendants today are the Arabs. Now, if Sarah did not make that decision, try to manipulate and control and connive her way into getting what she thinks she needed to do to get what God promised, maybe we would not have all these wars that we've been fighting all these years. Ever think about that? Anytime you manipulate God's promise, there is always a consequence that will always end up with loss. Anytime you manipulate, you engineer, you tweak with, help God. Yeah, God said it, but I got to do my part. But be careful what your part is. Your part might not be as big as you think. Sarah was thinking very logically, but she wasn't thinking spiritually. Because she wasn't thinking spiritually, she messed things up royally. What happened? Because time is running, Hagar gets pregnant. The slave girl now is carrying the only child of Abraham. So naturally, she gets a little prideful. She starts looking down on Sarah. So Sarah gets fearful and jealous. So she starts mistreating her, abusing her. That's the word. I don't know if she was beating her up. I don't know if she was making her do all kinds of heavy labor. She was a bad person. That's another thing. Bible doesn't cover the bad stuff. Like it says, Bible shows everything, warts and all. The good parts and the bad parts. So, what does Hagar do? She can't take it anymore. So she's pregnant. Her mistress is mistreating her. She says, you know what? Anything is better than this. I'm out of here. She takes off into the desert. Because why? How would you feel if you had no hope? How would you feel if you were her? You're a slave. You have to do what this mean woman says. 24 hours a day, you're at her command. You don't matter. And nobody cares. They only care about what you can give to them. And that right now is a fertile womb, a baby. She said, this is not worth it. She just takes off. She says, I'm done. So she runs away. Verse 7. Now the angel of the Lord found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to shore. There's a very interesting word here. Angel of the Lord found her. Angel of the Lord, over here, the way, I'm not going to go into all that, I don't have time, but this is a theophany. This is most likely Jesus speaking to her right now. Old Testament usage of certain words that says angel of the Lord at times is Christophanies, at the very least theophanies, meaning Jesus shows up in the Old Testament. And this is one of those instances. So he says to her, where are you going? But before I get to that, he found her, it says. For someone to be found necessitates for somebody else to be looking for her. She thought she was lost. She thought it was at the end of her life. She just wanted to run away and probably die in the desert. But there was somebody looking for her. And that was the Lord. And he found her because he was looking for her. If you feel lost, remember, Lord is looking for you. It might not feel like it. You might not see it or comprehend it. In this case, we see in history that Jesus literally spoke to her, but because it's in the scripture, as soon as you remember this truth, in your mind the same thing happens to you. Remember that he is looking for you. When you feel lost and confused, and when you're in a place where you don't belong and you don't know what's next and where to go and what to do, he's looking for you. Then he asks her two questions. He already knows who she is. He says, slave of Sarai, where are you coming from? Where are you going? Not that he doesn't know, but she says, I'm running away from my mistress. And then the Lord told her something very difficult. He said, go back to her, and this is the rub. Submit to her. Yikes. That hurts. I tell you, I wouldn't want to do it. You mean you want me to go back to this, let's be nice, bad woman and submit to her abuse and mistreatment? Yes. Hoo-wee. And she does. You see, in this story so far, Sarah was not being godly. But Hagar, who's not even in the covenant, was being faithful, and she obeyed the Lord. Sarah didn't until this point, but Hagar did. She did the right thing, even if it was not popular, even if it didn't make sense, even if it was difficult. She did the right thing. And what's the right thing? Whatever the Lord tells you to do. And then he says, and the angel of the Lord, return to your mistress and submit herself to her authority. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child. You're pregnant. You're going to have a son. She doesn't know if she's going to have a son or a daughter. He said, you're going to have a son, and you will name his name Ishmael. And he says he's going to be like a wild donkey. He's going to fight with everybody, and everybody's going to fight with him. Do you see that happening today? We're still fighting Arabs, right? Still, 2,000 years later, no, 3,000 years later. And they're fighting with everybody else, right? There it is. It started with that one woman and one wrong decision. I mean Sarah, I don't mean Hagar, because Hagar had nothing to do with it. She had to do what was told her. I'm fast forwarding, I'm out of time. I want to point out two things. You will name him Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. You know what the word Ishmael means? It means God hears. God heard her affliction while nobody else would. God heard her mistreatment, her pain, her frustration, while nobody else would. In case you forgot, God told her, you're going to name your son God hears. So every time you call his name, you will remember, I hear. Furthermore, what did she say? Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, God who sees. God sees and God hears. God saw her affliction while nobody else would see her. If you talk to a homeless person, you know what they complain about the most? They say, one of our biggest problems, food, shelter, yes. But one of the biggest problems is people pretend like they don't see us. They don't turn around, they don't look, they don't want to look you in the eye. They're afraid that you might ask for money. They just pretend like they don't see you. That was Hagar's problem too. She was a slave. Nobody saw her. They just saw the potential of her making a baby. But God saw her. God was seeing her. And that was the most important thing she needed. So on this Mother's Day, guys, there's so much more I can go into, but let's finish it here. All you moms, you ladies, young ladies, future moms, grandmas, I want you to remember these verses, these promises of God. God sees you. God hears you. And He is looking for you. Don't feel like you're abandoned. Don't feel like nobody hears. Don't feel like nobody cares. At the end of the story, if you turn to chapter 21, when Ishmael grows up and Sarah, in a jealous rage one day, just says, throw them out of here. I don't want them in the house, and this and that. She starts going. She runs out of water. At this point, Ishmael is 13 years old, and they're about to die. She's so distraught, so lost. Angel of the Lord shows up again and shows her what she needed. She was so sad and so afflicted that she did not see there was the spring of water right there. So you can find yourself in a desperate situation. You can find yourself in a seemingly impossible situation. Remember, don't get lost in that feeling, because what you need might be right in front of you, and you might not be able to see it because of your despair and fear and sadness. To get rid of that, remember God's promises. He sees. He hears. Just submit to what God says. Do what is godly. Do what is spiritual, and then at the end you will have the reward. God bless you.